Look, we're entering the most competitive state in baseball right now. Throwing low to mid 80s is not going to miss barrels. 90 miles per hour is the benchmark for throwing hard. But most pitchers train for years and never even come close to that. Just like me when I was 17, stuck throwing 80 miles per hour. I thought I would never reach 90 miles per hour, but after years of training on my own and trying every single drill under the sun, I got myself throwing in the low 90s. So if you're looking to throw 90 miles per hour and beyond without thinking you need to rely on natural talent and genetics, then this video is for you. But if you think I'm gonna just rattle off the top 10 throwing drills to throw 90, then click away, because that's not what you need. But if you're actually serious and want to start throwing 90 miles per hour, then stick around. I'm going to show you exactly how you can copy and paste what I'm about to teach you into your own training routine so you can throw 90. All right, so what I'm going to do is break down everything section by section so you can really understand the mistakes I was making and then what I changed so I can start throwing in the 90s. Okay, so starting off with throwing. Before, when I was throwing in the low 80s, I tried so many drills that I saw online. Like many of you, I had Instagram. I was scrolling. I would see a drill that, Trevor Bauer was doing, or Yu Darvish, or whoever, and I would think automatically in my head, like, oh, if they're doing it, like, I should be doing it. They throw hard. I want to throw hard. Why wouldn't I just do this drill? And what I failed to realize is, at that time, is everybody moves different, right? Like the way that Darvish moves is completely different than the way that I move. So a drill that applies to his mechanics don't necessarily apply to mine. So that was the first thing I did. And then I also overanalyzed my video all the time. Like every single time I threw a bullpen, I would take a video, I would compare it to my last bullpen or whatever, and I would just try to nitpick and be super perfect with every part of my mechanics. And what I didn't realize is that perfect mechanics don't exist, okay? Only your perfect mechanics exist, and I'm gonna talk about that in a little bit. And then another thing was just copying MLB guys. Like I tried to throw like Jose Fernandez for a really long time, and a lot of you probably don't know who that is, RIP Jose, but I loved his mechanics. He threw hard. He was the ideal pitcher that I wanted to try to become, but going back to the point I made earlier, I didn't move like him. We don't have the same hip anatomy. We don't have the same mobility. We don't have the same, movement limitations. So by me trying to copy Jose Fernandez, I just made myself worse. But when I actually started to throw hard, I just went back to my roots, okay? Like what I was doing when I was a kid, and I didn't think about mechanics, and what that looked like was playing long toss, doing athletic catch, and, ripping pull downs, because those kinds of throwing promote freedom. So if you're long tossing, you're trying to throw a ball as far as you can, your body's going to express freedom. If you're doing athletic catch, if you're trying to turn a double play, if, you're fielding a ground ball, you're throwing like a catcher, that's freedom. You don't have to think about the mechanics of those things. You just let your body self-organize, okay? And that's super, super important. And then same thing with pull downs, like you're running up and you're trying to throw a ball as hard as you possibly can. You don't need to think about the mechanics of it. It's just a raw primal movement. And I'm not saying that everybody and their mother should be doing pull downs. Obviously it needs to be programmed correctly, and you could get hurt if you do them too often, but having pull downs programmed in is such a good way for you to learn how your body wants to move. And then I experimented. I tried out different arm angles. I threw some sidearm, I threw some, even submarine. And this wasn't necessarily because I wanted to throw from those arm angles on the mound, but I just wanted to become a good thrower overall. Like I tried so many different things in the past that didn't work. So me doing different arm angles, me experimenting with those just promoted more freedom in my delivery. So I learned that, when I would throw sidearm, when I throw submarine, I just taught myself to be a better thrower overall, and that was super important. And then I still did drills, but I only did drills that applied to me. So I figured out what my limitations were. I had a really, really stabby arm action, so That was my lowest hanging fruit, so I addressed that. And I only did drills that applied to shortening up my arm action. You don't want to be doing drills that have nothing to do with what you need to work on, right? Everybody has their own set of unique mechanics and they move a different way. And if you have no idea what your mechanical limitations are, I created a system where I help pitchers just like you figure those things out and throw 5 to 10 miles per hour harder. My man Kyle's been working with me for 3 months and he's up 7 miles per hour. So if you want to learn how, you want to speak to me, book a call using the first link down below. But back to the video. I cannot stress enough, this is exactly on paper the changes that I made to go from the low 80s to the low 90s, at least on the throwing side of things. All right, so let's talk about the lifting side of things. Now, when I was in the low 80s, I just tried to lift like a bodybuilder. I was super new into the gym. A lot of my friends actually did bodybuilding, so I kind of just followed suit. I knew that guys who were throwing hard lifted, but I didn't really know how to lift, so kind of training like a bodybuilder was just what I did. So, I kind of chased a pump, started to build a little muscle, and, like anybody, I loved getting a pump. It was sick, but that wasn't really the right way to go about it. And what I did was I trained 5 to 6 days a week. I got kind of addicted to the gym, and I really just wanted to go to get a pump. And yeah, I was getting stronger during this time. I was making progress in the gym for sure, but it didn't really translate to my performance on the field, hence why it's under the low 80s section here. But really what I thought was get big equals automatic velo. And to touch on my diet a little bit, I ate in a huge calorie surplus. Like I was eating everything under the sun. And all this did was, yeah, put on a little bit of muscle, but it was mostly fat and I moved terrible. I actually kept throwing slow because of this, because I thought getting big would automatically, it's a terrible line, but getting big equals velo, and that just wasn't the case at all. So when I started throwing in the low 90s, I backed my lifting down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, and I prioritized recovery. Because when I was just go 5, 6 days a week, I wasn't giving myself a chance to recover, because stress plus rest equals growth. And hitting 3 days a week let me recover properly, right? Because throwing harder is, it's a full-time job. It really is. And if you're not hitting all of the pieces, then you're probably not going to throw harder. So recovery being a huge part of that. 3 days a week was perfect for me. And what I did was I focused on the heavy compounds, right? Like I'm not saying strength doesn't have anything to do with gaining velocity. It has a lot to do with it, but you need to do it in the right way. So I still focused on heavy compounds like the squat, the bench, the deadlift, but I did it in a way that caused me to be more explosive and helped me gain strength in the right ways. So the 5 to 6 rep range was really big for me. Allowed me to get a lot stronger in those key compound lifts. And the funny thing was, when I was training like a bodybuilder, a lot of me, a big part of me wanted to look good, right? I think you would be lying to yourself if you said you don't lift just to look good. You do, right? And throw harder, obviously. But I actually found that I looked way better lifting this way than when I lifted this way. So that was super interesting. A lot of it came down to my diet, but the big thing I want to emphasize is you don't want to lift like a bodybuilder if you're actually trying to throw harder, right? You want to lift like a pitcher trying to throw harder. And newsflash, pitcher-specific training does exist. You would be an idiot to think otherwise, but that's a video for another time. All right, so now diving into the nutrition side of things. When I was throwing in the low 80s, I tried doing a dirty bulk, and I can't say this enough, don't do this. Because when I dirty bulked, yeah, I gained a lot of weight quick, but 1, I looked terrible, and 2, I felt terrible. I actually threw slower from doing a dirty bulk. And a lot of the protein I was getting, right, so the second point here was from shakes and bars. And I'm not saying that protein shakes and protein bars are bad, But when the majority of your protein intake is coming from these, one, they're loaded with a lot of crap ingredients, and two, that protein isn't getting absorbed as well as it would with real food, okay? And we'll get to that over here. Another thing I did, or actually didn't do, was track calories. So I had no idea what I was putting into my body. I had no idea the macronutrient profile when it all added up. I really was just eating as much food as I possibly could, and I got fat from doing this, and it was not the right way to go about it. And then part of that was because I was obsessed with the weight on the scale. So I, was obsessed with watching that number go up. And it felt good in the moment. It was like a cheap rush of dopamine to see, this external validation that I was gaining weight. But looking back on it, I was actually doing myself a disservice because I was just gaining mostly fat. Like, I would gain 2 pounds a day just from eating everything. And I'd think to myself, oh, this is awesome. And then come to find out, when I hop on the mound that spring, I was throwing slower. Like, my shit sucked. I wasn't moving well. I just felt terrible, okay? So that's what I was doing then. And then when I started throwing in the low 90s, it was completely different. So I ate in a slight surplus with clean food. So I figured out what my maintenance calories were, and then I was in a 200 to 300 calorie surplus most of the time. Yeah, I went over once in a while, but for the most part, slight surplus with clean food. And the next point I have is protein from real foods. So over here, we talked about protein from shakes and bars. Like, yeah, when I was throwing low 90s, I still use protein shakes sometimes, but for the majority, it was from chicken, beef, and fish. Okay, so I ate mostly real, and eggs, mostly real and clean food to get my protein in. And this was super, super important because I felt way better. I built more muscle, and my performance on the mound showed it. And then during this time, I started actually tracking my macros. So when, I was over here, when I was a little bit fatter and I didn't track, I had no idea what I was putting in my body, so I would overeat constantly. But over here, when I actually tracked that stuff, if I hit my calories for the day and there was still, a couple hours left before I went to bed, I would just stop eating because I didn't need to eat anymore. Because if I went over what my goal already was, then that extra food was probably just going to be stored as fat, and it didn't really do me any good. All right, so another thing that guys will completely mess up when it comes to throwing harder is their mobility. Okay, so before, when I was throwing in the low 80s, this is what I did. So I did random drills that I saw on the internet. So going back to throwing, I was doing the same thing with mobility. I saw all of these mobility exercises that maybe these MLB players or high-level college players were doing, and I just tried to copy and paste those. And maybe there was a little bit more leeway because, a lot of mobility is pretty relative across the board, but even then, my mobility did not get much better. And another thing that I did, and something that a lot of you are probably doing, is I spammed the 90-90 hip switch because it was the easiest hip mobility exercise. I was always able to do it. I knew it kind of worked for some guys, so I did that all the time. And my hip mobility didn't get a whole lot better. And the last thing was, I was just overwhelmed with this long routine. Like, when I was trying to get better with my mobility, I had all of these different exercises, like 10, 15 exercises, something absolutely crazy. And I followed that routine every day, and I would take up so much time that I could have been spending doing targeted mobility, which we'll talk about here. But instead, I wasted all this time doing a bunch of fluff that didn't really move the needle forward for me. So going to what I did after, when I threw in the low 90s, I did targeted mobility. So what does this mean exactly? I did mobility that was specific to what I needed. I addressed my weak points, the parts of my body that were really tight, the parts of my body that I had trouble accessing, in deeper ranges of motion. And I just did mobility that was specific to those parts. And this helped me tremendously. And it saved time because I wasn't doing, 10 to 15 different drills with this long routine that I had. So that was really important. And then I focused on soft tissue first. So basically what soft tissue is getting a foam roller or a lacrosse ball or something and digging it into those tight areas. So I always did this before I did like an active mobility exercise, just to prep that muscle and really address the tightness. I think a lot of guys neglect their soft tissue work, and it's why they have movement problems. But that's a story for another day. So just to build off of those first two things, I had a small, consistent routine with 3 to 4 key exercises. I figured out where I was tight. I figured out where I had the worst mobility, and then I built a routine that only targeted those areas. Now, am I saying I never did other spots? No, I did sometimes, but I really just put an emphasis on what I needed to work on the most. And that's the most important thing in the mobility side that got me from the low 80s to the low 90s. So moving on. So to wrap this all up, if I can boil every single thing I talked about in this video down to one statement, it would be real velocity equals consistency on the right things plus athleticism. Okay, I will say that again. Real velocity equals consistency on the right things plus athleticism. So consistency on the things that you need to work on, getting more athletic, and doing those every day. Now, you can take all of these principles, copy and paste them into your training, and probably make really good progress. But if you want me to personally analyze your mechanics and build you out an entire blueprint for you specifically to make a huge velo jump, then book a call with me using the first link down below. We'll talk about where you're at, where you want to get to, how I can help, just like I'm doing for Luke, for Ant, for Kyle, for Jimmy, and a ton of other pitchers who are just like you. Book a call with me down below. Let's talk.